They call me the shadow of Lanterna, a waitress so invisible I've become part of the wallpaper. But they don't see the woman who memorizes chemical structures between coffee refills. Today, the world of high-stakes biotech crashed into my diner in the form of Bernardo Cucci, the billionaire CEO of Cucci Biotech, looking less like a titan and more like a ghost. He didn't know his inner circle had turned his own life-saving medicine into a lethal signature. He didn't know his doctors were paid to let him fade away. But I knew. I saw the telltale signs of neurosuppressant poisoning that no E would catch. In 60 seconds, using nothing but a stolen vial of charcoal and my sister's advanced chemistry notes, I stripped the crown from Death's head. I didn't just save a billionaire. I dismantled a corporate assassination. Now the man who owns half the city realizes the only person he can trust is the girl who forgotten by it. The fluorescent lights of the Lanterna diner hummed with a low, agonizing frequency that felt like a migraine set to music. It was 11:42 p.m. on a rain-slick Tuesday in Seattle. I moved through the narrow aisles like a ghost, my sneakers squeaking against the cracked linoleum. My apron was stained with grease and the faint, sweet scent of maple syrup, a smell that had become my permanent skin. I was 24 and I was exhausted. Not just the kind of tired that a good night's sleep could fix, but a deep, bone-weary fatigue that comes from carrying the weight of a dying mother and a brilliant sister's future on your shoulders. Every tip I shoved into my pocket was a heartbeat closer to paying off the $180,000 mountain of medical debt my mother had left behind before she finally let go. Every shift I picked up was a brick in the wall of Sophia's education. Sophia, the real genius, was finishing her PhD in biochemistry at UW, and I was the engine that kept her lab lights on. The diner was nearly empty when he walked in. He didn't look like a billionaire. Bernardo Cucci was a man built of sharp angles and heavy shadows. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my apartment building, but it was rumpled, his tie loosened as if it were a noose. He stumbled toward the counter, his hand pressed hard against his solar plexus. "Coffee!" he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I didn't reach for the pot. I looked at him. Really looked at him. "You don't want coffee, Mr. Cucci," I said quietly. He froze, his dark, intelligent eyes snapping to mine. Even in his state, they were piercing, the eyes of a man who saw through spreadsheets and soulless boardrooms. "You know me?" "Everyone knows the man who's trying to cure Alzheimer's," I replied, stepping closer. "But right now, your pupils are pinpricks, your sweat is viscous, and your tremors are localized in your left hand. You're not having a heart attack, and you're not drunk." I grabbed a clean glass and reached under the counter for the emergency kit I kept hidden behind the extra napkins. It wasn't a first aid kit. It was a collection of Sophia's study samples and the specialized binders I'd spent my nights memorizing. "Sit," I commanded. It wasn't a request. He collapsed onto the stool, his breathing shallow. I felt fine an hour ago. My private physician gave me my vitamin infusion." "Your physician is either incompetent or a murderer," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline hammering in my chest. I pulled out a small, unlabeled vial of a thick, black liquid-activated charcoal suspended in a proprietary binding agent Sophia had developed for her thesis on toxin extraction. "What is that?" He gasped, his head lolling. "Life," I said. I forced him to drink. I didn't care about the black stains on his expensive shirt. I watched the clock on the wall, counting the seconds. I knew the chemistry. The toxin he'd been given was likely a synthetic organophosphate, a corporate-grade poison, designed to mimic a sudden stroke. It was elegant, untraceable, and would have been final if he had gone to a hospital where they followed standard protocols. But I wasn't a standard protocol. I was a girl who had read every one of her sister's medical journals, because I couldn't afford a life of my own. After 10 minutes, the color began to return to his face. The tremors slowed. He took a long, shuddering breath, the kind a man takes when he realizes he's still on the right side of the grass. "Who are you?" he whispered, looking at me as if I were a hallucination. "I'm Corolla," I said, wiping the counter with a damp rag, returning to my invisible self. "And you should probably leave before the people who did this come to see why you're still breathing." He looked out the rain-streaked window at a black SUV idling across the street. His face hardened, the vulnerability of the dying man replaced by the cold steel of the CEO. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, not a credit card, but a heavy matte black business card with a single gold emblem. "The people in my world are supposed to be the best," Bernardo said, his voice regaining its command. "My doctors, my security, my board. And yet I was dying on a sidewalk while they waited to sign my death certificate. You saved me with a glass of black sludge and a glance." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the air in the diner feel thin. "My world is compromised, Corolla. I can't go to a hospital. I can't go home. I need a ghost. Someone who knows the science but doesn't exist in the system. I have a job, Mr. Cucci. I have bills. I have a sister," I said, though my heart was racing. "I will pay your debts. All of them," he said. The words were a lifeline thrown into the middle of my stormy sea. "I don't need a waitress. I need a private medical consultant. I need you to stay in my house, monitor my food, my medicine, and my circle. Be my eyes while I find out which of my friends is trying to bury me." I looked at the stack of unpaid hospital bills tucked under the register. I thought of Sophia sleeping on a couch in a shared dorm, sacrificing her health for a degree. "I have one condition," I said. "Anything. My sister. She stays under your protection too. If I'm entering your war, she isn't collateral damage." Bernardo Cucci stood up, his height imposing even as he leaned against the counter for support. He reached across the laminate and took my hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was firm. "Consider it done," he said, as I took off my apron and walked out of the lanterna. Leaving the smell of grease behind for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like a Cinderella. I felt like a soldier. I was stepping into a world of glass towers and billion-dollar patents, armed with nothing but my brain and a fierce need to survive. The billionaire was safe for tonight. But the war for Cucci Biotech had only just begun. Stepping into the Cucci Biotech headquarters was like stepping into a cold, glass future. The air here didn't smell like grease and old coffee. It smelled of ozone, expensive cologne, and the sterile scent of high-end laboratories. I traded my stained apron for a tailored navy blazer, but I kept my invisible skin. In this world of sharps and Italian silk, a private health consultant was just another piece of office furniture. They looked at me, but they didn't see me. And that was their first mistake. Bernardo's estate was a fortress of minimalism. Every morning I would prepare his meals myself, my hands steady as I measured out proteins and complex carbohydrates, my mind cataloging every ingredient like a chemical formula. I wasn't just his cook. I was his biological firewall. "You're watching them, aren't you?" Bernardo asked one morning. He was sitting at the head of a mahogany table that could seat 20, but it was just the two of us. He looked stronger, the color back in his olive skin, but his eyes were weary. "I'm watching the way they don't look at you," I replied, setting a bowl of steel-cut oats in front of him. "And the way they look at each other." In the first week, I became a shadow in his boardroom. I sat in the corner with a tablet, ostensibly tracking Bernardo's vitals via a synchronized biometric watch. In reality, I was reading the room. I saw Enzo Falco, the coup, a man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, that were always calculating the distance between Bernardo and the exit. Enzo was smooth, charming, the kind of man who would hand you a glass of wine while checking your pulse for weakness. Bernardo, my friend, Enzo said during a heated session about the Aegis, patent a revolutionary molecule that could repair damaged neural pathways. The board is concerned. Your recent flu. It slowed our timeline. We need to push the FDA filing by Friday, or our investors will jump ship to Falco's rivals. The science isn't ready, Enzo, Bernardo said, his voice a low rumble. We don't rush Aegis, it saves lives or it does nothing. I saw it then, a micro-expression on Enzo's face. Not frustration, contempt. He looked at Bernardo, the way a butcher looks at a cow that's refusing to walk into the slaughterhouse. That night, the silence of the estate was broken by the arrival of a courier. Enzo had sent a gift, a new rapid delivery nutrient system developed in the secondary labs. For Bernardo's recovery, the note said. I stood in the kitchen, the sleek silver vials shimmering under the LED lights. They looked innocent. They looked like medicine, But as I held one to the light, I noticed the viscosity was slightly off. It moved a fraction slower than the standard saline base. Corolla? Bernardo appeared in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light from the hallway. Enzo says this will have me back at 100% by the shareholder meeting. I looked from the vial to the man who had pulled me out of the diner. He was starting to trust me, not just with his life, but with his thoughts. He told me about his father, the man who started Cucci Biotech in a garage, and about his dream of a world where no daughter had to watch her mother fade away because of a price tag on a pill. He was a man of honor in a world of profit. "Do you trust him, Bernardo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He was quiet for a long time. "We grew up together. He was at my mother's funeral. He helped me build this empire." "History isn't a safeguard against greed," I said. I took the vial and tucked it into my pocket. "I need to run some tests. Don't touch these. Don't let anyone know I took them." He nodded, a silent pact forming between us. There was something growing between us, an intellectual intimacy that felt more dangerous than the poison. He respected my mind, and I respected his heart. In the quiet hours of the night, we'd talk about chemistry and philosophy, two lonely souls finding a common language in the wreckage of a corporate war. But the walls were closing in. Enzo was becoming bolder, calling for an emergency health assessment by the board of directors. He wanted to prove Bernardo was mentally and physically unfit to lead, all while helping him recover with the very vials I held in my hand. The next morning, I saw Enzo in the hallway. He stopped, looking at my plain clothes and my quiet demeanor. "The waitress," he sneered, though his voice was honey-sweet. "I hope you're taking good care of our CEO. He's very precious to us." "I take my job very seriously, Mr. Falco," I said, meeting his gaze. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "I'm sure you do," he said, leaning in. "Just remember, Corolla, in this building some people are meant to be seen and others are meant to disappear. Make sure you know which one you are." He walked away, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering like a threat. I watched him go, my hand gripping the vial in my pocket. He thought I was a fly on the wall. He didn't realize that flies are the first ones to see the rot. I needed Sophia. I needed a lab that wasn't under the Cucci umbrella. And I needed to move fast. The shareholder vote was in 3 days, and I could feel the invisible noose tightening around Bernardo's neck. The air in the Cucci estate had turned heavy, saturated with the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Bernardo was recovering, yes, but he was also a prisoner in his own home. Every time Enzo Falco called to check in, I saw the muscle in Bernardo's jaw tighten. They were brothers in arms once, but now Enzo was measuring Bernardo for a casket made of corporate filings and biological warfare. I couldn't use the labs at Cucci Biotech. Every sensor, every technician, every digital footprint in that building belonged to the company. And right now, the company was a shark tank controlled by Enzo. "I need to leave for a few hours," I told Bernardo on Wednesday night. We were in his study, the walls lined with leather-bound books and cutting-edge medical journals. He was looking at a portrait of his mother, his expression unreadable. "Marco will drive you," he said, not looking away from the painting. No drivers." "No security," I insisted. "If Enzo's people see me leaving with your head of security, they'll know I'm onto them. I need to be the invisible waitress again. Just a girl going to visit her sister." Bernardo finally looked at me. The power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't the untouchable titan anymore, and I wasn't the girl from the diner. We were two people standing on a collapsing bridge, holding on to each other's secrets. He reached out, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. A brief, electric contact that said more than any contract ever could. "Be careful, Corolla. If they realize what you are, you become the primary target." I took the bus. It was a 3-hour journey to the university district, a humbling reminder of the world I had briefly stepped out of. I clutched my backpack to my chest. The padded envelope containing the stolen medicine tucked deep inside. Sophia's lab was a chaotic sanctuary of glass beakers, whiteboards covered in frantic equations, and the hum of a mass spectrometer. When she saw me, she didn't hug me first. She looked at my eyes, checking for the exhaustion she knew so well. "Cora, you look different," she whispered, pulling me into a corner. "You look like you're carrying a bomb." I am," I said, handing her the envelope. I need a full molecular breakdown. Not just the active ingredients. I need the impurities, the binding agents, and the reaction curve. And Sophia, I need it by morning. She didn't ask why. She saw the desperation in my face, the same desperation I'd had when we couldn't pay for Mom's oxygen tanks. She went to work. I sat on a hard plastic stool, watching her move with a precision that was beautiful to behold. As the hours ticked by, the mass spectrometer hummed, and the data began to crawl across the monitor's dot at 3:14 a.m. Sophia stopped. She leaned back, her face pale under the harsh LED lights. "It's a masterpiece, Cora," she said, her voice trembling. "And it's a death sentence." She pointed to a spike on the graph, a complex synthetic molecule that looked almost identical to Bernardo's legitimate Aegis compound. "It's a chiral mirror molecule," Sophia explained. "On the surface, it looks like the medicine. It even treats the symptoms for the first 48 hours. But once it hits the blood-brain barrier, it begins to unfold. It's designed to trigger a massive, localized neuroinflammation. To any coroner, it would look like a rare, aggressive form of viral encephalitis. A tragic, natural death for a man under high stress." "How long?" I asked, my heart turning into a block of ice. "If he starts the full dosage tomorrow morning, as Enzo recommended, he'll be in a coma by the shareholder meeting on Friday. He'll be dead by Sunday." I didn't cry. I didn't have time. I took the printed data, the digital logs, and the raw chemical signatures. I thanked Sophia, kissed her forehead, and caught the first bus back to the city. When I arrived at the estate, the sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon. The house was quiet, but as I moved toward Bernardo's room, I heard voices coming from the dining hall. I pressed myself against the cold marble wall. My breath held. "The board is ready." "Enzo," it was Tay, the advisor in the gray suit. His voice was hushed, urgent. "But what if the girl interferes? She's been hovering over him like a hawk. The waitress?" Enzo's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "She's a peasant, Tay. She's impressed by the shiny lights and the big house. She thinks she's playing doctor, but she's just a distraction. Let her keep playing. It keeps Bernardo occupied while we finalize the hostile takeover. By Friday afternoon, Bernardo Cucci will be a footnote in history, and I will be the face of the new Aegis." "And the girl?" "Once Bernardo is incapacitated, she'd be sent back to her diner with a generous severance package. If she talks, well, nobody listens to a waitress with a history of debt and a dead mother. She's a ghost. And ghosts don't win wars." They walked away, their footsteps echoing like a countdown. I slipped into Bernardo's room. He was awake, sitting by the window, watching the city he had built. I didn't say a word. I simply laid the lab reports on his lap. He read them slowly. He didn't erupt in anger. He didn't call for his security. He just grew colder, his eyes turning into flint. "He wants a hostile takeover," Bernardo said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "He wants to turn my father's legacy into a weapon for profit." "He thinks I'm a ghost," I said, standing tall. "He thinks I'm invisible." Bernardo stood up, towering over me. He reached out and cupped my face with his hand. For the first time, the billionaire CEO looked at the waitress and saw an equal. "Then let's give him a haunting he'll never forget," he whispered. "The shareholder meeting is in 24 hours. Corolla, are you ready to destroy a man with nothing but the truth?" "I've been destroyed by better men than Enzo Falco," I replied. It's time someone returned the favor. The air in the 50th floor boardroom of Cucci Biotech was thin, filtered, and smelled of cold ambition. Sunlight bounced off the glass towers of Seattle, but inside, the atmosphere was funereal. The mahogany table was surrounded by the 12 members of the board, men and women who controlled the flow of billions. At the head of the table sat Enzo Falco, his hands folded with a practiced, somber grace. Bernardo sat to his right, looking pale. I stood behind him, dressed in a simple black suit, my hair pulled back tight. To the board, I was just a medical assistant, a piece of the background. "Members of the board," Enzo began, his voice dipping into a tone of tragic concern. "It breaks my heart to bring this motion forward. We all know Bernardo's visionary leadership. But after his recent collapse and the subsequent neurological instability, the medical reports from our internal team are clear. He is no longer capable of the cognitive load required for the Aegis launch. For the sake of the shareholders, I move for an immediate vote to transition executive power to the Q office. A murmur rippled through the room. The medical data is indisputable, Tay added, sliding a glossy folder across the table. Wait, Bernardo's voice was a rasp, a perfect imitation of a man struggling to speak. He looked at me. My assistant. She has the updated labs. Enzo let out a soft, condescending chuckle. Bernardo, please. This young woman is a waitress we hired for your comfort. She's not a board-certified neurologist. I don't need a board certification to read a murder mystery, Mr. Falco, I said, stepping forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the clarity of a bell in a silent cathedral. I didn't wait for permission. I tapped the tablet in my hand, and the massive 100-inch smart wall at the end of the room flickered to life. Instead of the company's stock growth, it displayed a complex molecular overlay. This, I said, pointing to a jagged red spike on the graph, is the Aegis mirror compound. It was found in the recovery vitamins delivered to Mr. Cucci's private residence 3 days ago. Vials that were hand-delivered by Mr. Falco. Enzo stood up, his face reddening. This is absurd. Who do you think you are? Security. Security is currently busy letting the FBI into the lobby, I said, my eyes locking onto his. I saw the first crack in his mask, a flicker of pure, unadulterated terror. The compound on the screen isn't medicine. It's a synthetic neurotoxin designed to mimic viral encephalitis. It's proprietary. It's untraceable by standard hospital panels. But it's not untraceable to a mass spectrometer at the University of Washington. I swiped the screen. A new document appeared, the receipt from Restaurant Falco. On the night of the first poisoning, Mr. Falco. You were at a private dinner at 9:47 p.m. You were seen handling a specialized lab transport case. Mr. Cucci arrived at the Lanterna Diner at 11:52 p.m., showing peak-level symptoms of a 2-hour onset cycle. The chemistry doesn't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. And I definitely don't lie. The room was deathly silent. I turned to the board. Mr. Falco didn't want to save this company. He wanted to hijack it by murdering the man who built it. He used Cucci Biotech's own resources to design a weapon against its founder. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. 4 federal agents and windbreakers stepped in, led by Marco. Enzo Falco, the lead agent said. You're under arrest for corporate espionage, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Enzo looked around the room, searching for an ally, but Tay had already moved his chair away. And the board members were looking at him with the coldness of people who hated being lied to. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, Enzo looked at me. Not with contempt, but with a horrifying realization of the invisible girl he had ignored. You, he hissed. You were just a waitress. And you, I replied, were just a mistake I corrected. 6 months later, the air was different. The rain had stopped, and the Seattle spring was blooming with a stubborn, bright beauty. I wasn't in a diner. I was standing on a stage in the lobby of the newly christened De Rose Cucci Medical Foundation. Cameras flashed, and the scent of expensive lily filled the air. Bernardo stood beside me, looking stronger than ever, his hand resting firmly on the small of my back. He hadn't just cleared my mother's debts. He had built a monument to her struggle. The foundation was designed to provide free, cutting-edge treatments to families who were drowning in medical costs, the invisibles of the world who had been forgotten by the system. You look like you're thinking about the coffee machine, Bernardo whispered in my ear, his breath warm. I'm thinking about the white plates, I admitted, smiling. And how much better this feels. After the ceremony, we walked out onto the private terrace overlooking the Sound. The sun was setting, casting a golden bridge across the water. Bernardo turned to me, his expression softening in a way he only allowed when we were alone. I spent my whole life looking for brilliance in boardrooms and laboratories, he said, taking both of my hands in his. I never thought I'd find the person who would save my life and my soul in a late-night diner over a stack of pancakes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a corporate logo, but a diamond that caught the light like a star. Corolla de Rose, you saw me when I was invisible to my own friends. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. I don't want a consultant anymore. I want a partner. For the rest of my life. I looked at the ring, then at the man who had become my world. I thought of the exhaustion, the grease, the long nights of studying by the light of a vending machine. I thought of Sophia, who was now heading the Foundation's research wing. The fairy tale wasn't about the money. It was about the respect. It was about being seen. Yes, I whispered, tears finally blurring my vision. Yes, Bernardo. As he kissed me, the shadow of Lanterna finally stepped into the light. The invisible girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had rewritten the formula for her own life. We were no longer just a billionaire and a waitress. We were the architects of a new kind of empire. One built on medicine, on truth, and on the slow burn love that happens when two people truly see each other for the first time. And that is how a girl with nothing but a rag and a brilliant mind took down a titan and built a legacy. If this modern fairy tale gave you chills, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more Destiny Shift dramas. Life is a script. Make sure you're the one holding the pen. See you in the next one.